Hello, curious minds. Welcome to this intellectual journey. Today, we're diving into a thinker who is in equal parts terrifying and profoundly liberating. We're talking about Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher often called the father of existentialism. But he's not a philosopher of abstract systems. He's a philosopher of the individual, of you and of me. We live in an era of constant noise, of the clamor of the crowd, of algorithms telling us what to think and who to be. In this sea of conformity, the most urgent question is, how can one be an authentic self? How can you live a life that is truly your own? Few philosophers have taken this question more seriously than Kierkegaard. His work isn't a self-help manual. It's an often uncomfortable mirror, forcing us to confront the ways we deceive ourselves. He speaks to us of angst, of despair, and of the paradox of faith. He presents us with a path divided into three stages, three spheres of existence, through which a person may or may not pass. The big question Kierkegaard throws at us across the centuries is this: are you living a life of pleasure, a life of duty, or a life of faith? And more importantly, have you chosen that life, or have you simply stumbled into it? That's the core of our analysis today. We're going to deconstruct these three stages to understand the existential challenge he proposes. This journey will take us to 19th century Copenhagen, confront us with the seduction of Don Juan, the stability of the judge, and Abraham's terrifying silence before God. Kierkegaard's goal isn't to give us easy answers, but to make us aware of the infinite passion required for the simple act of existing as an individual. Before we dive in, a quick note. To bring this narrative to life, I've used AI tools to generate the images you see. Think of them as a canvas, a way to illustrate the ideas and the atmosphere of 19th century Copenhagen. They won't always be a literal representation, but rather a visual accompaniment to spark your imagination with me. I sincerely hope you enjoy it. To begin, let's set the scene. Søren Kierkegaard lived from 1813 to 1855 during Copenhagen's golden age. It was a time of great cultural flourishing, but also, according to him, of suffocating bourgeois conformity. His personal life was marked by melancholy, a large inherited fortune that allowed him not to work, and a defining decision, the breaking off of his engagement to Regine Olsen. This breakup wasn't just a simple heartbreak. For Kierkegaard, it was an existential act. He felt he couldn't drag Regine into his own complex melancholy, and that his philosophical and religious calling required absolute solitude. This event became the fuel for much of his work, using it as an example of the painful choices the individual must make. But his great intellectual enemy wasn't a person, but two things. First, the system of the German philosopher Hegel, and second, the crowd. Both, for Kierkegaard, were machines for annihilating the individual. They were ways of hiding from the terrifying responsibility of existence. Hegelianism was a totalizing philosophy that attempted to explain all reality, history, and spirit as one grand, logical, and rational process. A magnificent, imposing system, and according to Kierkegaard, completely inhumane. It was a cathedral of thought where there was no room for a single real person, with their fears, passions, and paradoxical choices. And then there was the crowd, the anonymous public. Kierkegaard despised public opinion and the press of his time. He maintained that the crowd is the non-truth because within it, no one bears personal responsibility. It's easy to be brave, cruel, or just when one hides in the anonymity of we. The individual, by contrast, stands alone and is fully responsible. In this context, Kierkegaard proposes his big idea. The highest truth isn't objective truth, that of science or history. It's subjective truth. This doesn't mean that facts don't matter. It means that, for an existing being, the truth that defines their life isn't what they believe, but how they believe it. Passion, commitment, and inwardness are more important than objective correctness. He would say that a pagan who prays to an idol with infinite passion is closer to the truth than a theology professor who recites the creed correctly but without any personal commitment, merely out of habit. Truth to exist must be appropriated. It must be lived. It must be something you'd be willing to live and die for. This is the foundation of his existentialism. This radical subjectivity exposes us. If there's no system or a crowd to tell us who to be, we're alone with our freedom. And this freedom, Kierkegaard says, produces angst, which we often translate as dread or anxiety. It's a key concept. It's not fear of something specific like a lion or a storm. Angst is the vertigo of freedom. It's that feeling you get when you peer into an abyss, not out of fear of falling, but because of the terrifying possibility that you might choose to jump. It's the awareness of our own absolute freedom and the responsibility that comes with it. It's the dizziness before the power to be. Adam, before sinning, felt angst because he was free to disobey. If angst is the vertigo before the future, despair is the sickness of the present. It's the sickness of the self. Kierkegaard describes it as the sickness unto death, not because it kills the body, but because it kills the spirit. Despair has two main forms. The first is the despair of not wanting to be oneself, of wanting to be another. This is the person who hates themselves, who wishes they were richer, smarter, more popular. It's a constant escape from one's own identity. But there's a more subtle and, according to Kierkegaard, more common form of despair. It's the despair of not being conscious of having a self. It's the person who lives so immersed in the mundane, in their work, in their social role, that they don't even realize they are a spiritual individual. The third form is the most challenging. It's the despair of wanting to be oneself, but by one's own means. It's the Promethean challenge. It's the individual who tries to build their own identity from scratch, without accepting their dependence on something greater, what Kierkegaard would call God. For him, the self is only found in a correct relation to the power that constituted it. This is the human condition, trapped between the angst of freedom and the despair of not being an authentic self. So how do we live? This is where Kierkegaard introduces his famous 3 stages of existence, or spheres of life. They aren't age-based stages we automatically pass through. They are choices. They are ways of life one can opt for. It's important to note that they are mutually exclusive. You can't be in two at the same time. And the transition from one to another isn't a smooth evolution. It requires a leap, a radical decision. Let's start with the first, the most common, which Kierkegaard calls the aesthetic stage. The aesthetic stage is the life lived for pleasure, novelty, and sensory experience. The aesthete is the person whose primary goal is to avoid boredom. Their life is defined by the instant, by immediate enjoyment. They have no lasting commitments because commitment is the enemy of pleasure, as it implies repetition and duty. Kierkegaard explores this in his great work, Either Or. The first part is written from the perspective of A, the aesthete. He is witty, romantic, poetic, and profoundly unhappy. He seeks beauty, music, eroticism, but he doesn't seek the beloved person. He seeks the feeling of love. He seeks the idea of beauty, not beauty itself. The supreme icon of the aesthete is Don Juan. The seducer, Kierkegaard analyzes Mozart's Don Juan. The fascinating thing, he says, isn't that Don Juan loves 1,003 women. The fascinating thing is that he doesn't love any of them. He doesn't seek the woman, he seeks the feminine. Each conquest is merely an instant of pleasure that fades and must be immediately replaced by the next. It's an infinite hunt. The aesthete, to avoid boredom, practices what Kierkegaard calls the method of rotation. It's not just about seeking new pleasures, but about knowing how to enjoy them and when to abandon them, right before they become boring or demand commitment. It's a refined art of superficiality. It's the curator of experiences who never truly allows themselves to be touched by any of them. Think of modern culture's infinite scroll, the search for the next image, the next video, the next trend. It's a form of the method of rotation. We are constantly stimulated, but rarely commit to anything that requires effort or time. The aesthete is the master of FOMO, the fear of missing out, because their identity depends on being in the next great moment. But there's a trap. The aesthete, in their desperate pursuit of everything, ends up being nothing. Their self is just a collection of unconnected moments. They lack a central identity. They live in the possible, but never in the real. And the inevitable result of this life, Kierkegaard says, isn't happiness. It's supreme boredom, and boredom is the antechamber of despair. When the aesthete finally realizes that no new pleasure will fill their void, they fall into despair. They realize that a life without choice, without commitment, is a life without a self. At the bottom of this well of despair, the individual faces a radical choice, an either-or. They can remain in aesthetic despair, or they can take the leap to the next stage. That next stage is the ethical stage. The leap occurs through an act of will. The individual decides to choose oneself. What does this mean? It means accepting responsibility for one's own life, accepting limits, and committing to something beyond immediate pleasure. It's the decision to be a coherent person over time, rather than a series of disconnected moments. The icon of the ethical stage is Judge Wilhelm, the author of the second part of Either Or. He writes letters to the young aesthete A, defending his own life. The judge is a married man, a respected citizen, a professional. His life isn't defined by the instant, but by continuity, duty, and universal moral law. The aesthete lives in the possible. The ethical man lives in the real. He chooses marriage not as a romantic impulse, but as a lifelong commitment that must be renewed every day. He chooses his work, not out of passion for the moment, but as his vocation and his duty to society. His motto isn't enjoy, but fulfill your duty. In the ethical stage, the individual finds a solid self. They are defined by their choices and responsibilities. They are the good citizen, the faithful spouse, the loyal friend. They find deep meaning in living according to universal moral laws, which philosophers like Kant considered the pinnacle of morality. It's a life of order, meaning, and coherence. For many philosophies, this would be the end of the road. You've overcome aesthetic egoism and become a full moral member of the community. You are a good person. What more could there be? But for Kierkegaard, this is by no means the end. The ethical stage also has its own limit. It too can lead to despair. Ethical despair arises when the individual realizes two things. First, that they are incapable of perfectly fulfilling their duty. They fail. They sin. The universal moral law is an ideal they can never fully attain. This generates guilt. They realize their own inadequacy before the ideal they themselves have chosen. Second, and more importantly, they face a situation where universal ethical duty conflicts with something greater. What happens when the moral law, the universal, asks one thing of you, but a higher authority, a personal and absolute calling, asks another? This is where ethics breaks down. And this breakdown is the subject of Kierkegaard's most terrifying work, Fear and Trembling. In Fear and Trembling, Kierkegaard, under the pseudonym of Johannes de Silentio, uses the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac. This isn't a simple lesson in obedience. It is, for Kierkegaard, the most terrifying example of the problem. God commands Abraham to sacrifice his own son, Isaac. Abraham, the father of faith, prepares to do it. This is the heart of the absurd. Think of it from the ethical stage. What Abraham is doing is monstrous. The highest universal ethical law is thou shalt not kill, and more specifically, a father must love and protect his child. From an ethical standpoint, Abraham is without a doubt a murderer. There's no way to justify it to the community. It's an incomprehensible act. If Abraham had told his wife Sarah, God has asked me to kill our son, she would have thought he was mad. If he had told the high priest, they would have stopped him. Abraham cannot speak. He cannot explain himself. He is completely alone, in absolute silence, with this divine command that overrides ethics. Kierkegaard calls this the teleological suspension of the ethical. Ethics itself is suspended, set aside for a higher end, a telos, which is the personal relationship with God. Abraham steps out of the universal, morality for all, and enters a private and absolute relationship with the absolute God. This is what defines the religious stage. It's not simply believing in God as the ethical man who goes to church on Sundays might. The religious stage implies a direct, personal, and paradoxical relationship with the absolute, a relationship that may demand going against reason and universal morality. For Kierkegaard, this is the movement of faith. And faith is an absurdity? It is believing by virtue of the absurd. Abraham believes that somehow, even if he kills Isaac, he will have him back. There is no logic in this. It is a paradox. It is a leap into the void, trusting solely in God and not in human reason. The transition to the religious stage requires a double renunciation. First, the knight of faith, as Kierkegaard calls Abraham, must perform the movement of infinite resignation. He must give up everything he loves in the world. Abraham gives up Isaac. He surrenders him completely. He accepts that he has lost him forever. But then, the knight of faith takes one more step, the step of the absurd. I believe, he says, that despite having given him up, I will receive him back. And in the story, Abraham gets Isaac back. This is the paradox. First, he loses everything only to then regain everything, but in a new way. He receives him back not as a right, but as an absolute gift by virtue of the absurd. Kierkegaard distinguishes the knight of faith from the knight of infinite resignation. The latter is like a tragic hero. He is a spiritual dancer. He gives up what he loves and remains with the pain, but does so with greatness. He is understandable, though sad. We can admire him. But the knight of faith is incomprehensible. After performing the movement of resignation, he takes the leap and regains what he lost. And here's the strangest part. Kierkegaard says the knight of faith looks exactly like any other person. He's not a hermit in the mountains. He's the office worker, the shopkeeper, the mother of a family. Outwardly, he appears to be an ordinary ethical citizen. He enjoys his food, loves his family, goes to his job, but inwardly, he has performed the double movement. He lives every second of his life not as a right, but as an absurd and wonderful gift from God. He has given up everything and received it back. He lives with the peace of faith beyond angst and ethics. Thus we arrive at the leap of faith. It's crucial to understand that this leap isn't a logical step. It's not the result of a philosophical proof or scientific evidence. In fact, the leap is only possible precisely because evidence is lacking. It's an act of will, not of intellect. It's staking one's entire life on a personal relationship with God that defies reason. It's a total risk made in solitude, angst, and passion. This is Kierkegaard's authentic individual, not the aesthete who is a slave to their passions, not the ethical person who is a slave to the universal. It is the religious person who is free in their absolute relationship with the absolute. It is the self who has found themselves by losing themselves in God. It is the individual who dares to stand alone before the absurd. Now, Kierkegaard was a Christian. For him, the supreme absurdity was the incarnation. The idea that God, the infinite, eternal, and immutable being, would become a man, Jesus, who was born, suffered, and died at a specific point in time. This, to reason, is the greatest of paradoxes. It cannot be understood, it can only be believed or rejected. That's why Kierkegaard was a fierce critic of the Christendom of his time. The Danish state church had become, for him, a social institution. Being a Christian was something cultural, comfortable, ethical. It was part of being a good citizen. But it lacked the passion, the angst, the risk, the awareness of the absurd. It had become just another ethical system, not a leap of faith. In his later years, he launched furious pamphlets attacking the official church, accusing it of having betrayed the Christianity of the New Testament. For him, being a true Christian was something terrifying, a lifelong struggle, a constant leap, not a comfortable social ritual. This struggle cost him the disdain of Copenhagen society. So how do we summarize this journey? Kierkegaard presents us with a ladder. The first rung is the aesthetic stage, the life of pleasure and the flight from boredom. It's a life of non-choice, a life of instance. But this life inevitably leads to despair, to the emptiness of lacking a coherent self. The second rung is the ethical stage. Through a choice, the individual assumes responsibility. They are defined by duty, universal morality, and commitment. They marry, work, are a good citizen. They build a solid and coherent self. But this life too breaks down when confronted with the guilt of sin or the conflict with an absolute duty. The third and final rung is the religious stage. This isn't an evolution, it's a leap into the dark. It requires the suspension of the ethical. The individual, alone and in angst, enters a personal and paradoxical relationship with the absolute. They live by virtue of the absurd. They are the knight of faith who appears ordinary but lives every moment as a miraculous gift. Kierkegaard's legacy is immense. Although ignored in his own time, he became the fundamental inspiration for 20th century existentialism. Thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, and Martin Heidegger took his ideas of angst, freedom, absurdity, and the primacy of the individual as their starting point. Sartre, for example, would take the angst of freedom, but eliminate God. For Sartre, we are condemned to be free in a universe without an absolute. Camus would explore the absurd, the collision between our desire for meaning and a silent universe, and propose rebellion instead of the leap of faith. Kierkegaard is the root of all these conversations. Kierkegaard doesn't offer us comfort. He doesn't give us a system to hide behind. He strips away all our excuses. He rips us from the crowd and plants us alone in front of the mirror. He asks us, who are you? Have you chosen your life? Or are you simply adrift in the aesthetic or ethical stage without ever having faced the true choice of your existence? His philosophy is bitter medicine. It forces us to consider that the most comfortable life, the most socially accepted, the most ethical life can also be a form of despair if it hasn't been passionately chosen from the deepest individuality. It reminds us that being an individual is the most difficult and most important task we have. It's been a dense, but I hope fascinating journey. Exploring Kierkegaard isn't just studying the history of philosophy, it's looking directly into the mirror of our own decisions and commitments. He's a thinker who doesn't leave us indifferent, who demands we take a stand. Thank you truly for accompanying me on this deep analysis, for dedicating your time to these ideas. But the conversation doesn't end here. I'd love to know what you think. In which stage of existence do you believe our current society spends most of its time? Do you resonate more with the aesthete, the ethical person, or with the struggle of the knight of faith? Leave me your thoughts in the comments. I truly read and value every single one of them. If you enjoy these deep analyses, these deconstructions of complex ideas, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell. It's the best way to support this project and to not miss our next intellectual journey. Until next time, curious minds. To delve a bit deeper, it's vital to understand Kierkegaard's use of pseudonyms. He didn't sign works like Either or Fear and Trembling with his own name. He used fictional authors, A, the aesthete, B, the judge, Johannes de Silentio, Abraham's admirer. Why this indirect communication? Kierkegaard believed that subjective truth cannot be taught directly. If he were to tell you, you must have faith, that would just be another objective truth, another external rule. Instead, he presents you with possibilities of existence. He presents the aesthete to you, he presents the ethical person, he presents the knight of faith. He doesn't tell you which to choose. He shows you the lives so that you feel the pull, the despair, and the necessity of choice. The goal isn't for you to agree with B or Johannes de Silentio. The goal is that, in reading them, you are forced to examine your own life. Kierkegaard's writing is a Socratic mirror. It's designed to make you ask questions, not to give you answers. He wants the reader to become an individual, not a disciple. Let's return to the aesthete for a moment. Kierkegaard distinguishes between two types of aesthetes. The first is the immediate aesthete, who simply pursues pleasure without thought, like Don Juan. But there's another, more refined and dangerous one, the reflective aesthete. This is the romantic, the poet, the one who lives in melancholy and nostalgia. Their pleasure is memory, the interesting sadness. This reflective aesthete is even more enslaved because they don't even live in the present. They live in an idealized and poetic version of the past. It's the seducer's diary, found in Either Or. The seducer Johannes isn't interested in the girl Cordelia. He's interested in the process of seduction, in the psychological engineering, in turning her into a work of art for his memory. Once he has her, he loses all interest. Both the immediate and reflective aesthete end up in despair because both avoid the choice that defines the self. The ethical choice isn't a choice between good and evil. That comes later. The fundamental ethical choice is the choice of willing to choose. It's the act of will that says, my life will not be an accident, it will be a construction. And regarding the ethical stage, it's key to understand its connection with the universal. The ethical person is transparent to themselves and to others. Their duties are clear, they are everyone's duties. You shall not lie, you shall be a good parent, you shall keep your promises. Their identity merges with their social role. They are predictable, and in that predictability they find peace and meaning. The problem is that this transparency is, for Kierkegaard, an illusion. Real life isn't so orderly. Life throws paradoxes at us. Life presents us with moments like Abraham's where the universal isn't enough. The ethical person, by defining their self by their universal duties, loses themselves as an individual. They become a citizen or a spouse, but not this singular individual. Kierkegaard's critique of ethics is subtle. He doesn't say that ethics is bad. In fact, it's an infinitely superior stage to the aesthetic. What he says is that it's not the end, it's a necessary stage. You can't leap from the aesthetic stage to the religious one. Why? Because to be able to suspend ethics, you first have to have ethics. You have to have fully committed to universal duty. Only someone who deeply loves ethics, who feels the weight of "thou shalt not kill" in every fiber of their being, can feel the absolute terror of God's command to Abraham. An aesthete would simply have shrugged. Abraham, as an ethical man, is the only one who can experience fear and trembling. That's why he is the father of faith. Faith presupposes ethics and then transcends it in paradox. This brings us back to Abraham's silence. It is a silence of solitude. The tragic hero, like a general sacrificing his daughter for the nation, can be understood. We mourn for him, but we understand him. He acted for a higher ethical good, saving the city. But Abraham has no ethical justification. His act is for him and for God. He is alone. The knight of faith is fundamentally alone, and here Kierkegaard issues a warning. How do we know if someone is an Abraham or just a madman? How do we distinguish the leap of faith from temptation? Abraham himself couldn't be sure. Faith isn't certainty. Faith is the passion of maintaining the relationship with God amidst the most absolute uncertainty. It's a lifelong risk. Faith, for Kierkegaard, isn't a comfort. It's the hardest thing in the world. It's much easier to be an aesthete and seek pleasure. It's easier to be an ethical person and follow the rules. The hardest thing is to be an individual, alone, in a passionate relationship with the absolute that can ask anything of you. This is the radical vision of Christianity as existence. So when Kierkegaard looks at us today, he asks, is your life an evasion? Aesthetic. Is it comfortable conformity, even moral conformity? Ethical. Or have you dared to be an individual, to face the angst of your freedom, to find yourself in the relationship with that which transcends you, whatever that may mean for you? His message isn't that we all must become religious in Abraham's style. His message is that we must be conscious. We must choose. We must live with passion. The worst life for Kierkegaard is the unlived life, the life of the spectator, the life of a member of the crowd, the life without risk, without passion, and without a self. Kierkegaard died young, at 42, collapsed in the street, exhausted by his philosophical struggle and his final attack on the church. He was a comet, a solitary figure whose work was written not for his time, but for ours. For the era of the massified individual, for the era of aesthetic distraction, for the era that most needs to remember what it means to exist. His use of irony and sarcasm was his main tool. He mocked professors, journalists, bishops. He called them professors of existence, people who had turned life into a set of boring lessons instead of a dangerous adventure. He wanted to awaken people, even if it meant they hated him. Subjectivity is truth remains his most revolutionary phrase. It's not a blank check for relativism. It's a call to responsibility. You cannot outsource your existence. You cannot let science, nor the church, nor politics, nor the crowd tell you how to live your unique life. That burden, that glorious and terrifying burden, is yours alone. In the end, Kierkegaard is the philosopher of inwardness. In a world obsessed with the external, with success, with appearance, with public opinion, his voice calls us back to the only place where the truth of a life is decided. He calls us back to ourselves, to that silent space where amidst angst we choose who to be. So Kierkegaard's journey is a journey inward. It's the rejection of the easy truth of the crowd and the system. It's the movement from the life of passive pleasures of the aesthete through the life of universal responsibility of the ethical person to the life of personal and paradoxical commitment of the knight of faith. It's a call to stop being a spectator and become the protagonist of your own existence. Kierkegaard doesn't give us answers. He gives us better questions. And perhaps that's the mark of the greatest teachers. He doesn't tell you what to think. He forces you to think for yourself and to live the consequences of those thoughts. It's been a dense, but I hope fascinating journey. Exploring Kierkegaard isn't just studying the history of philosophy. It's looking directly into the mirror of our own decisions and commitments. He's a thinker who doesn't leave us indifferent, who demands we take a stand. Thank you truly for accompanying me on this deep analysis, for dedicating your time to these ideas. But the conversation doesn't end here. I'd love to know what you think. In which stage of existence do you believe our current society spends most of its time? Do you resonate more with the aesthete, the ethical person, or with the struggle of the knight of faith? Leave me your thoughts in the comments. I truly read and value every single one of them. This is a space for rigorous curiosity. If you enjoy these deep analyses, these deconstructions of complex ideas that help us better understand our world and ourselves, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell. It's the best way to support this project and to ensure we can keep having these conversations. There's a universe of ideas to explore. Thank you for thinking with me. Until next time, curious minds.